Mordecai Vanunu wasn't a household name until he became the man who cracked open one of the most closely guarded nuclear secrets in the world. What he exposed didn't just ripple through Israel's intelligence community. It challenged an entire region's understanding of military power, secrecy, and how far a government would go.
If you enjoyed this breakdown, don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop a comment. Your feedback helps shape what we cover next, and you being here keeps the conversation going. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.
To protect its silence. Vanunu was born in Morocco and later immigrated to Israel, where he eventually landed a job as a nuclear technician at the Negev Nuclear Research Center in Dimona. Inside that facility, he saw more than just reactors and technology. He saw evidence clear, classified, and undeniable of a nuclear weapons program that Israel had never officially admitted to possessing. And the world, still operating under the illusion that Israel's nuclear capability was a big maybe. But for Vanunu, it wasn't just a job anymore. Over time, his political and ideological views shifted. He began questioning the morality of what he was a part of. And eventually, he made the decision that would change the course of his life and ignite one of the boldest intelligence operations Mossad would ever pull off. He smuggled out photographs damning evidence of Israel's nuclear arsenal and left the country. The story eventually landed in the hands of the Sunday Times in London, and the result was explosive. The world now had visual proof that Israel wasn't just playing coy with its nuclear policy. It had an arsenal, a real one. But long before the article was published, Mossad had already activated. They knew Vanunu had vanished with secrets. They didn't just want to stop the leak, they wanted to erase it. And that's where the infamous honey trap came in. Her name was Cheryl Hannon. At least, that's what she told him. Young, charming, and exactly the kind of woman who doesn't just fall into the life of a reclusive ex-nuclear technician living in Europe. Vanunu had no idea he was being played by an intelligence operative, deployed with one goal: gain his trust, get him somewhere outside of the UK, and let Mossad take care of the rest. He followed her to Rome. And that's where it ended. In a Mossad operation straight out of a spy novel, Vanunu was lured to a secluded apartment, drugged, and then abducted. Smuggled onto a yacht in the Mediterranean, he was secretly transported to Israel. Italy's sovereignty, violated. International law, brushed aside. When national security was on the line, Mossad didn't wait for diplomacy. Vanunu's sudden disappearance didn't go unnoticed, but by the time anyone figured out what had happened, he was already behind bars in Israel. His trial was closed off, classified, and heavily controlled. He was charged with treason and espionage, and convicted. But the sentence wasn't just prison. It was near total isolation. Vanunu spent 18 years in prison. Over 11 of those years were in solitary confinement. No human contact. No daylight. No conversations beyond the occasional security check. It was punishment, yes, but it was also containment. The Israeli government wasn't taking any more chances. Even after his release, he was restricted, banned from speaking to foreigners, barred from leaving the country, and kept under constant surveillance. All of this because he revealed a truth the state didn't want confirmed. That truth shattered the illusion of nuclear ambiguity. Israel's don't ask, don't tell policy regarding nuclear weapons had allowed it to operate in a gray zone for decades, never officially acknowledging what it had, but never denying it either. Vanunu forced that curtain open. His photos, and the interviews he gave, made it clear, Israel wasn't a maybe, it was a nuclear power. That revelation didn't just matter to journalists and academics. It shifted the entire conversation about nuclear proliferation in the Middle East. It raised alarms in neighboring states. It challenged the West's complicity in maintaining the ambiguity. And it highlighted, in the clearest possible terms, how strategic silence is often protected not just by secrecy, but by force. Vanunu's case brought global attention to the power dynamics between whistleblowers and the states they challenge. He didn't sell secrets to a foreign government. He didn't pass classified files to an enemy. He exposed a national policy to the global public on moral grounds. But the Israeli state didn't draw moral lines. It drew legal ones. They treated him not as a man of conscience, but as a traitor. And the use of a honey trap, seduction, deception, emotional manipulation wasn't just a tactic. It was a cold calculation. Mossad exploited a very human vulnerability to resolve what they saw as a national emergency. And they did it with precision. The operation was successful. It didn't cause diplomatic chaos. Italy was caught off guard, but it didn't spark a crisis. The mission was clean, efficient, but ethically. It left a trail of questions. Because honey traps raise more than eyebrows, they raise moral dilemmas. Is it acceptable to manipulate someone emotionally, pretend to love them, just to deliver them to a prison cell? When does strategic necessity cross into psychological abuse? And what about sovereignty? Vanunu was in Rome. The abduction happened on Italian soil. No permission, no extradition, just force. It was a state operation against an individual, carried out in a foreign country, violating international law with zero accountability. And the punishment didn't end with the prison sentence. Decades after his capture, Vanunu still lives under strict controls. He's not free in any meaningful sense. He remains a national security concern in the eyes of the Israeli state, a potential threat simply for speaking to the wrong person. Yet through all of it, he never backed down. Vanunu has maintained his position. He acted out of conscience. He believed the public had the right to know. He believed secrecy was more dangerous than truth. And he believed that nuclear weapons hidden, unacknowledged, and regulated posed an existential threat. Whether people agree with him or not, the price he paid is undeniable. His case is still used in debates about whistleblowing, state power, intelligence ethics, and human rights. Was he a hero? A traitor? Both? It depends on who you ask. But the facts are clear. He exposed a secret, was hunted down for it, and was silenced through every method available: psychological, legal, physical. His story isn't just about nukes or espionage. It's about what governments are willing to do to control the narrative. And it's about what happens when one person dares to challenge that control. If this breakdown gave you a deeper look into the darker corners of intelligence operations, hit that like button. Share this with someone who still thinks whistleblowing is just telling the truth. And drop a comment: where do you draw the line between loyalty to country and loyalty to truth? Subscribe for more stories that unravel the machinery behind the headlines, because the deeper you look, the wilder it gets. Vanunu's story doesn't fade after the headlines, it haunts the silence that followed. Because even after 18 years behind bars, mostly in solitary confinement, he didn't disappear. He wasn't allowed to. The Israeli state made sure of it. Upon release in 2004, Mordecai Vanunu walked out of prison not into freedom, but into surveillance, into restrictions, into a different kind of cage. He couldn't leave the country, couldn't speak to foreign journalists, couldn't use a phone without being watched. His movements were tracked, his conversations monitored, and every attempt to speak publicly, every whisper of further disclosure, was met with legal threats or actual arrest. Let that sink in. The man served his full sentence. And still, the punishment continued. It's not about preventing future crimes. It's about controlling the narrative forever. And here's where it gets even more complicated. While Vanunu was effectively silenced and contained, the information he released continued to echo. It didn't just prove what many already suspected, it confirmed it in a way that stripped plausible deniability from the table. Before Vanunu, Israel's nuclear policy relied on strategic ambiguity, a wink-and-nod approach to deterrence. They didn't need to admit anything, everyone just assumed. That ambiguity gave Israel room to maneuver diplomatically. It avoided open criticism. It allowed allies to maintain official silence. But Vanunu changed all that. He didn't just guess. He showed. He handed the world photographs, details, technical descriptions of the processes used in Dimona. And that wasn't speculation, that was evidence. After the Sunday Times published his revelations in 1986, the quiet understanding about Israel's capabilities became an undeniable reality. And the international reaction? Muted, carefully managed, diplomatically contained. Why? Because Israel is a U.S. ally. Because admitting what Vanunu revealed would mean confronting a double standard in non-proliferation policy. Israel has never signed the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty (NPT), but it receives military aid, strategic support, and political protection from nations that do. So instead of outrage, the revelations were met with geopolitical pragmatism. Western governments didn't punish. They pivoted. They minimized. They let Vanunu rot in a cell while they continued doing business as usual with a now officially unofficial nuclear power. And that's one of the most chilling aspects of the story, how quickly truth can be absorbed, repackaged, and ignored. Vanunu exposed a violation of transparency in the global nuclear order, and the world adjusted around it. The messenger paid the price. The message was shelved. Meanwhile, inside Israel, public opinion remained sharply divided. Some saw him as a reckless traitor, someone who endangered national security for ego or ideology. Others, especially internationally, saw him as a man of conviction, someone who sacrificed his freedom to expose a dangerous hypocrisy. But in either case, no one doubted what he gave up. Because this wasn't a Snowden situation, where the whistleblower escapes into exile. Vanunu didn't disappear into another country with protection. He walked into the lion's den knowing what the consequences could be. And when Mossad found him, he didn't fight. He paid. The way they caught him is still discussed in intelligence circles. Not just for its precision, but for what it reveals about the way espionage truly works. Mossad didn't send a kill team. They didn't use force initially. They used trust. Or rather, the illusion of trust. The honey trap is one of the most morally ambiguous tools in the spy arsenal. It's not about strength, it's about exploiting the deepest parts of someone's psyche. Loneliness, desire, the basic human need to connect with someone. That's what they used against Vanunu. Cheryl Hannon, who never existed, was created for that purpose. She didn't seduce Vanunu for love. She seduced him for extraction. And it worked. Better than they could have hoped. He followed her, believed in her, walked right into the trap. And by the time the sedatives kicked in, Mossad already had their route planned. A yacht off the coast of Italy. A covert return to Israel. No media. No extradition. No accountability. This wasn't just about silencing a whistleblower. It was about sending a message to the next one. Don't even think about it. And for decades, no one did. Because the Vanunu operation didn't just remove a threat. It set a precedent. If you betray secrets, no matter where you run, we will find you. We will bring you back. And your trial won't be public. Your punishment won't end with your sentence. You'll become a warning. That's the power of the Vanunu story. It shows just how far a state will go when it feels its secrets slipping out of its control. But what makes this case uniquely disturbing is how clearly it also shows the cost of moral clarity. Vanunu didn't profit. He didn't hide. He stood by what he did, even when it cost him his entire life. He converted to Christianity. He spoke openly about his faith, about peace, about disarmament. And even after everything, after years of being locked in a cell designed to break a person, he still refused to say that he'd done the wrong thing. That's not something you see often in whistleblower stories. Not like this. Because the world usually moves on. People forget. Journalists shift focus. States bury their scandals under a new layer of secrecy. But Vanunu, he stayed right there in the middle of it. Under guard. Under restriction. Still insisting that nuclear secrecy was a danger to the world and that he had no regrets. And the debate still goes on. Was he a traitor who put Israel at risk by exposing its greatest national defense advantage? Or was he a moral actor trying to force a conversation the world was avoiding? There's no easy answer. That's the problem with stories like this. They force you to sit in the discomfort, to recognize that states don't always act justly and that truth doesn't always lead to justice. The line between whistleblower and criminal gets blurred when national security is involved, especially when the definition of security is controlled by the same state that decides your fate. What's undeniable is this: the Vanunu operation marked a turning point in intelligence history. It showcased how intelligence agencies don't just operate with precision, they operate with narrative control. They don't just stop leaks. They erase them, reshape them, and use them to solidify authority. Even today, Mordecai Vanunu lives under a silent kind of imprisonment. He walks freely, but not far. He speaks, but not to the press. His past is locked in an invisible cage of restrictions, and the key isn't likely to be handed over anytime soon. Vanunu's name might not trend. It's not splashed across headlines like other whistleblowers. But that's exactly the point. This wasn't a scandal designed for media digestion. It was a state operation designed to vanish. And it very nearly did. Because after the photos were published, after the initial media storm died down, Israel buried the story under walls of silence. No press access. No public trial. No televised outrage. Just a man, alone in a cell, being made into an example. The quiet erasure was strategic. Because this wasn't just about nuclear secrets, it was about control. controlling what the world knows, controlling how far the truth spreads, and above all, controlling the consequences of exposure. Vannunu's sentence was never just 18 years. His real sentence was permanent isolation from global conversation. And that's what Israel engineered so effectively. Not just a conviction but a narrative lockdown. And the reason for that control was simple. The stakes were massive. Before Vannunu's leak, Israel's policy of nuclear ambiguity was a masterclass in strategic diplomacy. Officially, Israel had no nukes. And officially, everyone assumed it did. And that gray area allowed Israel to avoid international scrutiny, sanctions, or even basic accountability under treaties like the NPT. Vannunu destroyed that balance. With a camera, a few rolls of film, and a decision. Once his photos were published, the ambiguity was dead. They showed nuclear warhead production, uranium enrichment, bomb-making infrastructure, detailed layouts of the Dimona facility. The numbers weren't small. Analysts estimated Israel had produced enough weapons-grade material for over 100 nuclear warheads. And suddenly, global leaders had to respond without responding. That's the thing about nuclear politics, everyone knows, but no one's supposed to say it. Vannunu's leak forced the world to acknowledge what it had been quietly enabling. And no one wanted that. So governments fell back on silence. Allies offered no public criticism. International institutions barely flinched. And Israel, it tightened the grip on Vannunu. It wasn't just political self-preservation. It was a signal. You don't expose the machine and walk away. Even after serving his full sentence, Vannunu was placed under strict post-release restrictions that continue to this day. He cannot travel. He cannot speak freely. He cannot meet foreign journalists without risking arrest. He has no phone. His internet use is monitored. He is a man legally forbidden to tell the truth again. Every appeal he's filed to leave Israel has been denied. Every request to be treated like a free citizen has been ignored. Why? Because the fear isn't what he did, it's what he still knows. Even after decades, Vannunu represents the possibility of further damage. The idea that one man, unaided by any foreign power, could dismantle a carefully constructed illusion simply by choosing to tell the truth. It's the kind of defiance that intelligence agencies hate most, not betrayal for money, not espionage for a rival state, but a lone actor motivated by conscience. That terrifies institutions built on secrecy. Vannunu's case also brings the ethics of espionage into sharp focus. Let's talk about the honey trap again, not as a tactic, but as a moral line. It worked. Mossad used romantic deception to manipulate and extract him. But what does that say about the boundaries intelligence services are willing to cross? When trust becomes a tool of entrapment, and love becomes a weapon, it raises uncomfortable questions. Is anything off limits in the name of national security? Do the ends always justify the means? What happens when states operate like syndicates, untouchable, unaccountable, above the laws they expect others to follow? And what happens to the people on the other end? Vannunu isn't a hero to everyone. Some call him reckless. Others argue that he undermined Israel's security. But even critics have to acknowledge the brutality of his treatment. 11 years in solitary confinement. Almost 2 decades of surveillance. Restrictions that persist with no end in sight. No second chances. No reintegration. This isn't about justice, it's about deterrence. Because Vannunu's punishment isn't meant for him alone. It's a warning to every technician, every analyst, every insider with a conscience. Cross this line, and we will make sure your life never resumes. That's the lesson. If this story pulled back the curtain on how far intelligence agencies will go to preserve their secrets, hit that like button. Share this with someone who still believes truth always leads to justice. And tell us in the comments, where would you draw the line between national security and the public's right to know? Subscribe if you want more stories that don't just skim the surface, because we're going deeper every time.